Hi, Patty. Okay, I'm going to get started. So today's AMAP is a couple questions. The questions that I got were, what type of cues are used in Pilates, movement or static? So I reached out to get a sense of what that was. I have a little better understanding, so I'm going to do that. And then the second question is, how did Joe teach Pilates to engage their pelvic floor? So I'll take care of that second. So first, and I think I'm coming down with a little cold or something, so I'm coughing a little bit today, so I'm sorry and I apologize for that ahead of time. Good afternoon, Patty. How are you today? Thanks for joining. Anybody else is joining? I appreciate you coming to, and remember this is, AMAP Friday, so if you have a question, you can DM me and I will add it to my list of questions that people are asking and be happy to have everybody talk about it. Hi, Monica. Okay, so cueing, right? And what type of cues are used in Pilates? Well, great. I'm glad you're good, Patty. The type of cues are variable, right? Because we have verbal cues, right? We have we have tactile cues, right? So and within tactile, the hands-on that both Joe and we see that Joe did, almost every picture you see of him teaching, he's got his hands on somebody working with them. Some people think it's inappropriate, and it may be, but at the time it may not have been, or maybe it is. I'm not going to get into all that, but there's hands-on, and Ramana did hands-on as well, and I do hands-on. I'm also a physical therapist that's licensed to do manual therapy, so I do that as well. But usually not. I don't mix the two. I mean, if you need PT, I can do the manipulations. I studied a lot of osteopathy and other types of manual therapy as far as myofascial release and things like that with the osteopaths. And I went to Thailand to study Thai massage, which is all manual, hands-on pretty much as well. So a lot of different things. So anyways, they're different. I mean, if you're not licensed to do hands-on in your state or your country, then you can't do it. You have to teach. So. But I'm pretty sure you're licensed to be able to cue, right, with your hands and push here and hold there and do things like that. You're not massaging, you're not manipulating, you're just helping them understand the foundation of their movement, okay? So that's part of what it's all about, is being able to do that. A couple people have asked to join the live video. I'm not really doing that at the moment because I have things to discuss. So afterwards we can, have discussions. Hi from Miami. It's great to see you. So, what's the hands-on? I mean, because the verbal, one of the things that I think happened during pandemic is that everybody's verbal cueing got improved quite a bit because that's all you had, right? When we look at this here, and you're watching me, it's two-dimensional, right? You don't get to see the three dimensions, so it's a little bit more difficult to see the fine detail of imbalances and issues and problems that you may normally see when you're live because it's so flat, okay? So there's that, but you also don't get to touch, so you can't put your hands on it and manipulate, and when I say manipulate, I don't mean joint manipulation, I mean hands-on, putting somebody, if they're twisted, putting them back into a better alignment for them, right? Because alignment is relative to each individual person, and there is the best alignment that we can get. The best balance within the imbalance is what I always like to say, right? Because everybody's I pretty much say everybody's in balance somewhere, somehow, at some point. And so, depending on their history, some are a lot more than others, and some people. They're always, with their anatomy and their hereditary issues, you're never going to make them balance because their bones are in a certain position that don't fit the anatomical position, right? So nowadays we see anatomical position in relationship to the body, and everything's perfect, right? And that's what everybody says. Oh, I need to get you back into balance like that, but that's not a reality. Again, I keep wanting to say most, but pretty much everybody, maybe 0.00001% of the population has that kind of a body. There's always possibilities. Anything's possible, it's just not probable, as I used to tell my kids. Okay, so, and everybody else is on that bell curve of all sorts of variations in relationship to rotations, bends, strengths, weaknesses, that kind of stuff. So we have to do what? We have to train and find the best balance within that. And the nice thing is that the closer you are to a relative balance for that person, the less likely there's stress and strain in the joints and in the soft tissues that have to work harder to hold you up against gravity all the time, right? So the farther off you get from your relative balance, it does create problems, and over time it can create all sorts of other issues as well, as far as joint dysfunction and things like that. So one of the things that we do with Pilates is really try to help people find their best relative balance. And the way we do that is that Joe's, part of his genius was the apparatus is always what? It's always square. Right, so if you put a body on something that's square, you can see whether they fit or not. If you try to force that squareness into their body, you're creating abnormal movement patterning and function and dysfunction. So if they can do it, there's ways to do that with your hands on, and it depends again on when they lie down or when they're standing up or when they're sitting, whatever it is that they're doing, because we go through that whole developmental sequence and we look at that through that process of the system that Joe developed, then we have to be able to see where is that, and does it carry over, in all the different positionings, right? Because that's how we learn to move. You're not born and start walking. We're not horses. Horses are born within hours, if that. They're up and they're walking, and within hours or a day or two, they're running. We're born and it takes us a year on average. Some people a little sooner, some people a little later, some people a lot later, some not too many real sooner. And to be able to walk, and usually before we can really run well and coordinate and organize it, somewhere between 4 and 5. And the last thing we get full control of is our balance, and that's usually around 6 or 7. And again, it's a bell curve. It's an average. It's what, when they've studied these things and they've taken 1,000 people or 2,000, whatever number they do, and they look at that and they say, okay, well, what are the numbers? That's what we're looking for, and that's what we see, and that's what we base things on to a certain degree. But if you were to look at each individual, you would see that they are all different. Okay, and as a Pilates teacher, that's how you're teaching. The whole teach the body in front of you. That's part of that, right? It's part of that process of you have to be able to look at that person and their history and their body to do it. Now, so how do we do hands-on? Well, there's two parts to movement, right? What's the job of the muscle, right? So, because we're teaching control through the brain to make the muscles do what we want them to do. And what's the job of the muscle? The job of the muscle is either to hold or move the bones, pretty much. And in relationship to gravity, and it's always ever-changing. It's never static. Even when you stand and try to stand as still as possible, there's slight perturbations of movement when you stand, because we're not a board. We're not a piece of metal. And even like if you look at a building and it gets windy out, they move a little bit, right? Because they break. So there's a slight amount of mobility, and what we have to do is, as teachers, is try to figure out, well, where's the need for the cue? I mean, is somebody got a problem in relationship to their stability or their mobility? That's the difference. So when somebody says, what are the cues, static, or, well, let me see what the question again, just to make sure I don't, movement or static, right? Well, everything you do has both of those in it, right? So you cannot move without a certain amount of stability. Okay, you take a step, the leg that you leave behind has to be stable to push off the ground, and if it doesn't, you're a blob on the floor. So it's always both of those. So the question, and I think what I try to teach in the training, our teacher certification, and part of what I got from Romana, but I've expanded on it the last 25, 30 years, looking at Joe science and looking at the science since him and the science of today, and a lot of it sort of matches and or supports what Joe talked about. And if we look at how the brain works, we know that it doesn't do one muscle or one muscle group. So when you look at most of the exercise machines that are not based on Pilates, and up until recently, maybe somebody's changing things, or they were influenced by Pilates. If you look at gyrotonics, well, Julio, he lived with Romana for a while. He was, he lived in her apartment, rented space, I believe. So he was exposed to Pilates. So, and he took it a different place, which is fine. The difference is you always need that understanding of how to mobilize and stabilize, and it's always shifting. And if we look at what Joe taught and his progression of the system, it takes you through those different stages in all the different positionings that we first learned to move in. And it gives us a dynamic resistance that is closely related to how the muscle works, or the muscle works closely related to how the spring works. You can go either way, but when you look at muscle research, there's a lot of information where they talk about the spring property of muscle. So that's something that I think we need to understand, is that the muscles are working like a spring. And when the spring sits there, it's static. And then when it moves, it has kinetic energy, and you're giving it more. But it's not alive. We are alive. So we have the ability in relationship to that. And when you look at the physics, the science and the physics, none of those, Newton and the people before him and the people after him didn't really address this process for the human body. They were looking at the spheres, the planets, and they were trying to understand the world much more than they were trying to understand how we moved and functioned, because people weren't really exercising back then, because most people didn't need to, because life was exercise, right? Everything they had to do required them to do stuff. Today, you can sit on your chair and basically hang out forever, and have somebody deliver you this and deliver you that, and you push a button. You probably have to get up to go to the bathroom and a few things, but you don't have to do a lot. Well, back in hundreds and thousands of years ago, that just wasn't the case, and it's only been in the last 100 or 200 years where that's really changed. And when we look at muscle mass and loss of muscle mass as we age, and I talked about this in one of my other ones, basically most of the reason, if you really think about why that happens, why as we age we lose muscle mass, is because what did you do from 0 to 25 or 30? You were active all the time. You played sports, you did different things, you did all these different things. Once you start working, you have kids, you get your job, what happens? You get less and less time. And so you do less and less movement. And then when people retire, right, so they're not even going to work. They're not getting in the car, they're not driving, they're not walking, they're not doing all those things. They're sitting, most retirees tend to sit around a lot more, watch TV or be on the computer, that type of thing. So what happens to their muscle mass? They start to lose it. So it's a relative thing. That's why Pilates is so good, because Joe talked about this, and he says, what was it? You should be able to do at 80 when you did at 20. And if you follow his system, you can. Now, if you start at 79, maybe not. Right? If you let 80 years go by before you do anything, you may not be able to get that true flexibility back of a 20-year-old, only because you may have a lot of comorbidities in relationship to the dysfunction that you spent the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, or 5 or 6 decades, whatever it is, doing and not doing, right? So that's also something to think about. So for cueing, where's the issue? Is it a stability issue, or is it a mobility issue? So stability, it's about holding, and you have to understand your powerhouses, and you have to practice your Pilates to teach Pilates the way Joe taught it and Romana taught it and the way I teach it. You have to understand those things, because if you don't do it well for your body, you end up with issues and problems over time as well. And at the same time, what do you have to do? You have to be able to impart that information from your body into theirs. It's not just holding somebody, you're giving that stability. And that's something that they have to learn to feel and find. and you have to discuss it, and you have to talk about it. So the cueing, again, is not just hands-on, but it can be. Because sometimes you can be talking to somebody, and you can ask them to do something over and over again, and it doesn't change. And then you put your hands on them, and it does. Why? Because maybe that person, learning process in their brain is skewed or biased towards tactile more than visual or more than auditory. And everybody has a combination. So those are the things to think about. And then as far as movement, one vertebrae at a time. So you can touch. You can help facilitate the movement. You can guide the movement. You can do all those things. Or you can do two things. You can stabilize one side and guide with the other. So I think that the answer to that question is basically, in Pilates, you're basically always doing both, right? You have, if you're teaching Joe's way, right? Joe's contrology. If you're doing those things, and that's what I teach, and what I got from Ramana, and I got from the archives, and studying for decades, also the history and the science. Again, that's basically when you look at the nervous system, and a lot of the nomenclature and the ideas were not available when Joe first started. But what did he do? He looked at people, he invented apparatus, he experimented with himself, and he experimented with his clients, right? Now clinical research is much different, but back then that was what clinical research was. You practice it and you saw the results. And he says that often in his writing. Well, I'm not sure exactly how many times, but he says it in his writing that that's the process. I know this works because I've done it on my body, and I've done it on my client's body, and they have been benefited. And this goes back to, well, Joe would keep changing things. Well, in 40 years, he didn't change much. If you look at the archives, and he had multiple photo shoots and opportunities to add new exercises, and he didn't, because the ones he did worked. He knew they worked, and if you did it the way he said, or the way he said, and did it, and on the apparatus, the closer to that, the better, right? Because now apparatus is all over the place, just like the exercises are all over the place. So if you're not doing that, you're still going to probably get benefit, because you get benefit from any type of exercise. The question is, are you going to get the same results that Joe claimed and that he's famous for, and why he had a studio the way he did? So that's the case. Okay, so that's my answer for, is Pilates cueing static or mobile, and it's really both. And you need to train yourself with that understanding and that processing, and if you do that, you will definitely improve your teaching for sure. Now, the other question was, how did Joseph teach people to engage the pelvic floor? Well, as far as I know, he never mentioned it. And for good reason, I think, because basically, when you look at the pelvic floor, unless there's been an injury or real trauma to the pelvis, you take a deep breath in, and guess what? Your pelvic floor works, because you have a container, and if this part drops down, if this part doesn't lift up, what happens? It starts to drop, and you're going to have ptosis and all sorts of things. So the nervous system is organized to be able to do both. Now, you can do isolated exercises and facilitate that a little bit, but I doubt anybody here, when they get clients, can tell them to work one or two or this muscle or that muscle in their pelvic floor, and any client really knows how to do that. And unless you have an EMG, a needle or something in there checking how the muscle's working, and again, I'm not sure you can do it with an ultrasound. Maybe some parts of it you can, to be able to see if the muscle is actually contracting and which ones and where and how. You don't really know. You just know that there's something down there contracting, okay? And that could be beneficial, but it could not be necessarily as well. And if you look at Joe's way of doing things, it's, the breathing was important. And so when you breathe, what happens? Pelvic floor works every time you take a deep breath. Every time you take a breath, really. So if you're breathing while you exercise, and that's what, Ramana said, no matter what, he wanted you to breathe. Even if you didn't follow his exact breathing pattern in the beginning, he wanted you to breathe. And then eventually he would start to train you and get you into his breathing. And his breathing wasn't really fast, right? It wasn't fast most of the time. If you look at Return to Life, what does he say? In Return to Life, he says, slow breath. And it's bolded, right? Or is it capitalized? I can't, or maybe both. But nothing else is, pretty much. So every exercise, he made sure that the breathing was something that you were supposed to pay attention to. So if you're not doing that when you're teaching, you're not teaching as the system as he did, as well as he did, and as the way he wanted it taught. And again, since he had 40 or 50 years and Ramon had 20 or 30, I trusted what they had to say, and I still do. And as a PT, I've used Pilates in my physical therapy practice from 1990 until the pandemic, and I closed my practice in 2020. So basically 30 years I always had a PT and Pilates together. And when I did that, I didn't, a lot of the PTs, they want to do this and they want to add PT stuff and they want to do all these other things. I didn't do that. It was separate. I hired the Pilates teachers when the client was ready for Pilates, because a lot of times when they came from injuries, they weren't able to do that. I would then progress them, and then when they were ready, they would work with the Pilates instructor. And when they were no longer needed me, then they were discharged, and then they could stay and continue to work out with the Pilates, and it worked very, very well. And I saw like Joe and Ramon, I saw the results. So I continued, for 30 years, continue to do it that way. I don't. Now I just have the studio up in the Berkshires, right? The museum, the Pilates Museum studio, because it's a museum, but it's half museum, half working studio. So I still have clients come up and do privates, and we do, different things like that. And we have Pilates at the Pillow, things like that. So there's still things that are taught that way, right? So that's what I'm doing. Now, pelvic floor. Now, there are PTs who can go in and do internal work, right? Or get in your perineum and use their hands on to find those muscles and start to teach you, if they're not working, how to do it properly. Okay, but I'm pretty sure almost every state you're going to need to be licensed to do that, because first of all, I see what's happening on social media, and you put your hand in the wrong place and it blows up. Well, if you're in somebody's perineum or you're inside taking care of that, that would be, I think so many people would be offended. But if that person needs that, and they, I don't do that. When I did my osteopathic training, they did internal work, and that's when I stopped. I just did the hands-on, the manipulation. I didn't finish the whole program because I didn't want to do internal work. I didn't want to be a PT gyno or a PT proctologist. That just wasn't for me. And it's not something I was interested in. So that's the other thing, is that you need to be able to be licensed, and it wasn't, the form was a request form, right? It wasn't, a form where you say, it's okay, it's okay if they do this. The forms that they showed us and that you should have if you're going to do that and license should really be a request, where they specifically request the techniques and the teaching, the work that you're going to be doing with them. So that's a little bit different as well. Okay, so you can do that, and there are stim machines, there are probes, there's different things that you can do for that type of thing. But again, that's a specialty, and if you're having somebody that really has had an injury to their pelvis or something else, and it looks like they're pitocing or they're having real problems, my suggestion as the PT is that you send them to somebody who has the training and the understanding of the pelvic health. And that could be usually that's much more women than men, because women tend to have a lot more issues with pelvic floor after giving birth, especially if it's natural. All right, if it's a natural birth, it tends to be a lot more damage to the and when I say damage, it's overstretched. And once they start nursing and the hormones come back to contract it back, it doesn't always come all the way back in. So there's a laxity in the tissue, and there's other things that can happen, and thus why they have some of their incontinence issues and other things like that. So if that's the case, then I would refer them to somebody who can do either the internal work and then start to teach them to train those things, not try to just do it with exercise, because it's hard to do, really. To be fine-tuning and again knowing which muscles were where and that type of thing. So Anybody that, says that they're certified as a pelvic floor Pilates person, certified for what? I mean, I don't think that they can be licensed to do that type of work, and I'm not so sure your insurance would cover you if you're doing hands-on, especially internal, for that type of work as well. So, I mean, a PT, you're a medical professional, and as long as, at least in New York, if you're trained to do that technique and that way of working, you're licensed to do it. But, there's protocols, there's things you have to do, there's all this stuff that has to be followed to do it properly, do it correctly, and the contraindications, all the different things that need to be understood to do that properly. Okay, so again, pelvic floor, if you're breathing properly, most people don't need to worry about their pelvic floor because you're breathing and it works automatically with the breath. Okay, and when you inhale, it wants to contract up. When you exhale, it's your belly, but then it relaxes, right? That tends to be how it goes. All right, but if you really, here's the difference. And I do this. I'm gonna at Pilates at the Pillow. One of my workshops is breathing Joe's way, right? And so he breathes a certain way to support certain functions in the movement. And it changes, and the timing and the rhythms, all these different things changes, and a lot of the information out there basically supports that you need to be able to have control. All right, and it happens automatically, but you can do training to do certain things, and then it can start to be a little bit more habitual, especially when you are not just sitting around, but you won't go to be active and you go to do certain things. So if you're practicing your Pilates, while you teach, then you're doing it. If you're teaching your clients to practice Pilates in their daily life, they're doing it. So that's the key, I think, as well, is making sure that you're providing them the understanding of that. And again, it's not so much pelvic floor that's what you want to do. And again, I guess if that's your specialty and you want to do it, and it's helping, great. I mean, anything that helps is important, right? And again, I see so much out there that I wouldn't do, that I don't agree with necessarily, but if somebody's doing it and it's helping people, great. But what I see is that a lot of times they do it and then everybody wants to imitate it, and it's not always that helpful. So, if it's for a specific injury or a specific problem or a specific person, what I do for that one person is not what I do for the next person who walks through the door, even if they complain of a similar type of problem, because they're no two are alike. And this is one of the things that you need to also understand about, Pilates teachers who study with Joe. Did they study to be a teacher with him specifically, where he spent the time and the energy and effort to train them to be a teacher, and Clara too? Or were they students, and did they come and work out? And then later they started to teach. Well, what are they teaching? They're teaching Pilates for their body, not necessarily for not necessarily for the next person or whatever. Okay, so that's also something to consider. Okay? All right, so that's pretty much for me my answers to those two questions. Anybody here have a question that you want to ask? You just put it, you can type it in and I'll try to answer it for you. If not, and you want to, send me a question as a DM, I'm happy to do that every Friday. Same time, same station. You can jump in and I will. And if you send me a question as a DM and you want to come live, I'll consider that, because again, this is for me to answer the questions. It's not to necessarily have that full dialogue, but if it's your question and you really want to jump in, it's a possibility. And if you're one of Elaine and I have a subscription for Instagram on her page. You can go and join that. It's a monthly subscription. And if you're one of those people, you automatically get to join. So because you're a subscriber. So that's one of the benefits of being a subscriber. What we do for them is much more just pretty much historical. Here I do ergonomics, biomechanics, business, whatever it is you have questions about. But if it's historical, then we do that that's usually we save that for the subscribers, because that's what we provide them with. Okay? All right. So, and again, if you Pilates, you're welcome. If you like this, or please tell other Pilates people to come and watch. I usually within a day or two I will post it to the Pilates Source YouTube channel, and you'll be able. And it's again it's underneath the AMAP Fridays, list, and I usually put the date on it, so they'll be able to find it, and you can tell them and do that. And if you like it, please like it and subscribe. That's pretty much one of the things. Now I also teach a couple other classes. I teach on a Monday. Elaine and we teach right now we're teaching the archival mat, but I think we have one more week and then we're breaking because we have to get ready for the Pilates at the Pillow, and there's so much to do those last 2 weeks. And then after that, we're going to be doing something else at the same time. So that's something that you can do. You can join in, and then after that, I think we maybe do 34 and 34, which is the mat for the dancers at Jacob's Pillow is what we're going to be teaching after the pillow. And then after that class, we right now we've been doing the 2x4, but we usually add different things to do afterwards. So that's Mondays, and then on Tuesday mornings, I teach my class, which is not Pilates. It's called Balanceology, and it's to help you improve your balance. And if that's something that or anybody that may need to improve their balance, they can sign up and join with me. It's any of my classes that I teach are on LinkedIn, and it's LinkedIn/Sean_Gallagher. So you can join me there as well. Okay, and then after my Balanceology on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, I teach the resistor class, which is the arm springs and the leg springs that Joe made a poster with, that has some breathing and some other things. So if it's something you want to do, it'd be great to have you join me. Love your chats. I'm going to visit the museum next year after I get married in November. Well, congratulations about getting married in November. And again, the museum is not full season yet. It's not open in the wintertime because the weather up there is usually very cold and snowy and it's tough. And I don't basically shut it down because I don't want to waste all that energy if I can't go up that often. So I shut it down and it's very difficult to even get it. If there's snow, it's like a 900-foot driveway. So if it's not plowed, it's like, forget it. It's almost impossible to get into. So, but, DM me first, and I'm happy to try to set something up with you. Okay? So thanks, Pilates to Restore, and Ivana, and Florence. Anybody else? Any more questions? Let me see if I missed any. I was talking. I don't think there's any more. Pilates says you're going to subscribe. Great. Thank you. Be good. And again, if you see something there and you have a question about any of that, there's over 75 videos. So if there's you watch any of those and you have a question about anything I discussed in there, let me know, and I'm happy to answer those questions as best I can. Okay? All right, so I don't see any more questions. So if there's no more, I'm going to end for today, and thank you for joining me. And again, if you know anybody else that'd be interested, have them join or watch and hopefully they'll gain some information. All right? Bye, everybody.